Thank you, whoever pushed that button. That's perfect timing. I think we should get started. People can join us as they come. I am going to share my screen. And you should all be seeing the slides for today. Okay, so welcome. This is an invited symposium, meaning the members of the panel and our discussant were invited here by Saltese specifically to talk about their expertise in and use of peer assessment and peer assessment related ideas. So we have a panel of 3 professors. We have Anka Lekhi from the University of British Columbia. She's waving at you. We have Schunn from the University of Pittsburgh. And Jackie Stewart, also from the University of British Columbia. Our discussant today is Armin Weinberger from Saarland University. I'll introduce him in a little more depth later on. And so you're going to get a chance to hear about the experience and expertise of each of the panelists, as well as our discussant. And then we'll be moving into an actual panel discussion where you can ask your questions. I'm going to start you off with just a little introduction to peer assessment. It's only going to take a few minutes, then the panel, then the discussant. Then just before the panel discussion, we're actually going to move into short breakout groups, probably about 10 minutes in the breakout group, to give you a chance to talk about what questions you have, and then for one of you to actually type them into the chat. So we have a good source of questions to keep the panel going productively for the rest of the session. So why are we here? For those of you that attended the Saltese webinar on peer assessment earlier, the introduction is going to be a little bit similar, but it's very short, so don't worry. So why do we do peer assessment? Why is it a good idea? What is the problem that might cause you to try peer assessment? And one of the main problems that as practitioners we have is this feeling that we're spending all this time correcting and it's not resulting in student learning. We're not seeing the effects of what we feel is like we're giving them really great feedback. Why aren't they improving more? And from the student perspective, students don't necessarily understand what we're looking for. Our feedback isn't necessarily as useful for them as we think it is. And peer assessment is something that can help with this. So just to be clear, this is not what I think that we're doing as teachers in the comic, but it may be what some of our students think we're doing. So peer assessment does have different meanings in different contexts. In today's symposium, by peer assessment, we're talking about actually having your students assess, evaluate in some way. Doesn't have to be assigning grades, but it could be providing feedback on an actual product. So not the other way it's sometimes used in the form of peer evaluations where they rate how well they contributed to the team. Did they work hard? Were they slackers? But actually looking at other students' work and assessing it and providing feedback in some way. Here are a few benefits for you as a teacher. I won't go into the benefits for the students because they are plentiful. And our first panelist, Schunn, is going to go into the details of that. And it will be explored throughout. So as a teacher, though, why peer assessment? One thing it's great for is it allows your students to get quick and plentiful feedback that you would never be able to provide. We just don't have the time as an individual. It has been shown to improve student engagement, increase the quality of what they're creating, and helps enhance group work. And also, as the teacher, it gives you some really good insight into some higher order thinking of the students because it makes them reflect on the standards and their own learning as well as their peers' learning. So you might see things that you never would have seen if you didn't try peer assessment. So that is my introduction. And now we are moving into Chris' presentation on the research of peer assessment.
All right, thanks for the kickoff, Phoebe. I'm glad to see we have a big gang attending. When I began doing this, it was like a tiny little research area off in the hinterlands, myself and a few others. doing some strange research, and now it's a very burgeoning field. It's really hard to keep up with all of the things that are going on. In the last 5 years, I think there have been 7 syntheses and meta-analyses published in various places. It's just such an onslaught of information to keep track of. So I just want to touch base quickly on some key findings that have been emerging and across lots and lots of studies. I first wanted to start kind of almost at a theoretical level, like why would this be a good form of learning? And there's just a lot of framing about active versus passive. There's a framework called ICAP that puts constructive above merely active. So it's not just the body's moving around and not being asleep. You're actually building knowledge through the construction of information. It also enables you to totally change the kinds of tasks that you're assigned, and so students benefit from the learning opportunities embedded in richer performance tasks. When it's you grading, and when I teach, it's 250 students. Scantron and multiple choice are awfully tempting, and when I do this peer assessment, I can do very rich project-based learning, even in my large classes. So there's embedded learning opportunities just by shifting the nature of the tasks that you're allowing students to work on. And then in addition to all of the many meta-analyses showing that the learning benefits as measured through traditional assessments is pretty good. There's also the sort of higher level learning skills metacognition, where you're asking them to reflect on what is strong and not strong, and that conveys itself some benefits. And you can even see bumps up in student participation in discussion groups, which itself is often a difficult thing to get going in some classroom settings, and there's it's sort of the side mutually reinforcing kind of learning technique. Okay, next slide. So there are many arrangements of peer assessment. When I think I've seen it all, I then see another study coming out in another description, and my mind is blown. But across all of those, we now have pretty consistent evidence from the meta-analyses. Anonymous is usually better than non-anonymous peer feedback, especially when you have some accountability mechanisms so they're not too anonymous. When you have multiple peers rather than just one peer giving feedback, that tends to produce better results. In part, students are more persuaded if multiple people offer some similar points. If it's just one versus one, well, who knows who's right? They might be right, I might be right. But now when multiple peers are all saying your introduction is terrible, or this idea doesn't make any sense, now it becomes more persuasive. Combining giving of comments and ratings tends to outperform either just comments or just ratings. Computer mediation can offer lots of support structures where just a piece of paper to fill out doesn't always work out as well. And some light training at the beginning on what constitutes a productive comment, a comment that the recipient will benefit from and the provider will benefit from, is usually going to lead to better outcomes. Okay, next slide. And then my last bit of content, I'm trying not to overwhelm you with like 4,000 findings. What within the peer feedback tends to produce the most powerful learning? Well, it turns out receiving's okay, but the providing side is the more consistent learning opportunity. So instead of thinking about it as cheap outsourcing, think about it as providing richer learning opportunities. if you're not allowing your students to do peer assessment, you're actually taking away a very important learning opportunity. Although rarely done, collaborative reviewing tends to actually outperform solo reviewing. So having students get together to do the review together, that's sort of on the frontier. And then when they give feedback, encouraging them to include explanations. Why are they recommending this point or that point? Why do they see this problematic? And being constructive, not just the problem, but here's how I would fix it. Those are the kinds of comments that are bidirectionally powerful for the provider and for the recipient. And then on the recipient side, this is just as well for teacher feedback. If the students don't have to do anything with the feedback they receive, it tends not to have any benefit. There needs to be some active processing, some work done with it. So just as, if you aren't going to require students to do something with your written feedback, I probably wouldn't bother. And this applies for peer feedback as well. Okay, so those are the main findings I wanted to share. Let me pass the baton.
Thank you, Chris. And just to everyone attending, you are welcome to type questions into the chat as we go. And we may have a little bit of time to address them immediately, or I may save them for the end, but they will be seen. So don't be afraid to type. And now we have Jackie Stewart from UBC.
Great. Hello, everyone. It's good to be here. My name is Jackie Stewart. I am a faculty member in the Department of Chemistry at UBC, and I also have a role at our Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology. And I'm going to share with you two things. One is an open source software program that my colleagues created at UBC for doing various forms of peer assessment. And then I'll also share with you an activity or an assignment I did with my organic chemistry class that used this software. I have some links for you. I probably won't put them in while I'm talking, but after I'll link out to where you can find the software and also some additional information about my assignment in case you're interested. So the software I'm going to share with you is called Compare. And this name is very deliberate. It's comparing pairs of work. And the theoretical basis that really underpins this is something called adaptive comparative judgment. The comparative judgment part is when people are given two things, we're pretty good at reliably deciding which one is better. And we can either use our intuition or particular criteria to do that, but deciding which one is better is fairly straightforward. When people have a piece of work and a long rubric, let's say it's a student doing that, they might not be able to apply all of those details like an instructor would. But students are very good, like all people, at comparing two things. The adaptive part comes in that if you have a computer algorithm that really carefully assigns those pairs of work, you can actually come up with a pretty good ranked order of quality on whatever kind of criterion that you're using. So the software at UBC Compare has students create their work. And this was developed by math faculty, English. It's used in all sorts of fields. It can be a text file, a video, an audio file, a figure, a diagram, anything like that. Students can create and upload into the system. And then there's the assessment phase where they go through and based on what their instructor has told them, they do the rankings. There's also a place to add comments because we know that's really important. So they can justify their rankings, not just, just do the ranking. And then this information can go back to the students. This can be used in a formative process. So maybe it's a draft piece of writing that we're asking students to do. They would reflect on that, revise, and submit a finished product, either for their instructor to grade or their peers again. But it also, for the instructor, will give a ranked list of quality. And then you can kind of decide, are you going to translate into some kind of a grade or not? You don't have to use that part if you don't want to. If you want to use it just for that formative feedback purposes, that's fine as well. Typically, the minimum number of pairs that's used is 3, but you could set it as high as you want. 4, 5, 6, all fine. You just need to take into account kind of students' workload. So that's how it works. They upload an assignment, they go through an assessment phase, and the instructor can provide what other criteria they like. The students can review that feedback and reflect on it, and then do something with it if they like. Next slide, please. So going to how I use this, I teach organic chemistry, as I said, and it's a very test-heavy subject where we, give quizzes and midterms and finals, and we grade them and people get scored. But I really wanted to try to do something that was like a more authentic assessment, or like Chris said, a more, performance kind of task. Like, what can you do with this content? It's not just all about drill and practice. And so I had a few goals for developing this thing I called the Choice Project. One was communicating to learn. So getting students actually to create something about their learning can be helpful. I wanted to help them connect the course content to their real lives, maybe be creative. They're science students, but of course there's a role for creativity in science. So can we build that in? And then also just broaden my assessment practices. I didn't like how, most of my grade was from testing, which is certainly valuable, but not really telling the whole story about people's way of thinking and their understanding. So I asked students to pick a format. They could make a video, a podcast, an infographic, or write a news article or kind of a science blog post about 3 things. They could explain a topic area to someone who just had first-year chemistry or general chemistry. They could connect what we were doing to their field of study. And I have students from pharmacy, forestry, life sciences, and so on. Or they could kind of try to combat chemophobia or the fear of chemistry. And so some people pick that to really try to, again, what are we doing in chemistry? Why do people think chemicals are bad and things like that? So I provided some tips and examples and provided a rubric. The first year I did this project, it was optional, and I had about it was in the winter term. I had 450 students and about 150 did the assignment, and I graded every single one. And it was horrible. So that's why I thought, hey, maybe I don't have to do that. And using Compare was a really great idea for the next time around. And I did have students do that peer feedback also from the point of view of that's really who the audience was supposed to be, like other students, people. When you're creating something for a particular audience that goes beyond your instructor, I think that's really valuable. So knowing that other people would look at their content, I think was really helpful as well. So using Compare allowed me to use the software to clearly communicate my requirements, which is always very helpful. It allowed students to get way more feedback than I would have done in my quick grading of 150 assignments, just from a practical point of view. And they also just got various perspectives, which is always really helpful. And of course, it also, it was a nice way to redistribute that student work. So if you think about some of these large video files or, Word documents or text files, that's a lot of stuff just to assign to the people doing the peer review. And Compare does that really, really easily. So I have a couple of examples. If you go to the next slide, I think my students really, embrace this activity. They were able, a forestry student talked about some of the organic chemistry related to a spruce beetle disease, which was really exciting. And then here's a student on the right who wrote something. So those who were inclined to do writing and didn't want to make something as visual had the opportunity to do that as well. So I'm going to stop there. I'm happy to talk more at the end about both the software and this assignment. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Jackie. I shared a couple of your links in the chat already, the Choice.
Perfect.
The one to your
Awesome.
project and the
Thank
one
you.
to Compare.
Awesome.
So our final panelist is Anka Lekhi from UBC, and she is going to talk to us about her use of peer assessment in a special first-year program.
Yes, thank you. Thanks. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here to discuss this topic with you. So I will be talking about how I use peer assessment in a cohort program that is specifically for international students and English language learners, as well as first-year students. Next slide. So I teach in the UBC Vantage Science program. And so this program consists of science courses with embedded English language requirement. And it began in 2014, and I also started teaching in the program in 2014. Next slide. So here's an overview of the program. It's an 11-month program, so students begin their studies in September, and then they work through all the way until July of the following year. Not to get bogged down by the details, but I just wanted to show you that there are, yes, science courses that the students take. So there's the English and the math and the chemistry, but also there's this embedded language support. So they take an academic English course as well as language tutorials. Next slide. So in 2014, I used peer assessment in 2 of the courses within this program. The first was in a science communication course that was in the 2nd semester of the students' 11-month program. And then I also used peer assessment in a capstone project course that the students do at the end of the year. Next class. Next slide, sorry, but you understood. Okay, so in the science communication course, the students in 2014 at least were asked to write 3 short essays as well as 1 long essay. And so peer assessment was around students would submit a draft, they would get peer evaluation or peer assessment in for that draft, and then they would submit a final version. In the project course, students work in pairs on a particular project, and then they give a presentation at a capstone conference at the end of the year, at the end of their year. And so the peer assessment was used for a practice presentation. So students would give feedback, and then they had the opportunity to have their final presentation. So in 2014, the peer assessment didn't go as well as I had hoped. So the peer feedback lacked details. Students would complete the ranking, but in the open comments, they would either not write anything at all or write things like just good, and that would be it. Students reported when we asked them about it, they reported that they didn't find the exercise useful. And I also, just as an aside, noticed the same lack of depth and detail in my own student evaluations of teaching in 2014. So in my own evaluations in the comment section, there would either be nothing at all or words like good or okay. Next slide. So the nice thing with this cohort, with being in this program, is that the instructors have a chance to really engage in dialogue and to talk about the program and our specific group of students and how to help them. So we had discussions after 2014, and we did notice that the same thing happening in multiple courses with peer assessment. So we identified 4 challenges that our students, who again are international students, English language learners, and first-year students, what they might face. So first we thought, well, maybe this is completely new to them. So it's a new skill. So like any new skill, you need some practice. Maybe the expectations are not clear. There's a lack of buy-in, so they might be wondering, why are we doing this? And they may not see the importance. And then maybe there's just not enough guidance from the instructors. Okay, so we made some changes. Next slide. So the first was that more courses in the program included peer assessment. I just highlighted the academic English courses, but there were more, but because sometimes it would change year to year, I just highlighted those ones. So in order to address the practice piece, we had more courses use peer assessment. Next slide. And then we also, again, because we could engage in dialogue, we discussed similar principles that would be used in each of the classes that would use peer assessment. So we kind of refer to this as our peer assessment training for the students. So the first was having clear expectations. Courses would include a discussion of what is good feedback, what does feedback mean, and how can it be effective. We also incorporated many direct questions in the open-ended comment boxes for students to focus their attention on specific aspects. So I've given you some examples there, some of the direct questions that we used. We also discussed in class, why are we doing peer assessment? So as an example, in the science communication course, there's the discussion about peer review in publishing and how that's related to what we're doing in our classes. And then finally, we also incorporated feedback on student feedback. And then we also, so that piece was there to give guidance as to, okay, yes, this is really great feedback that you're giving to your peers, or maybe some more examples to explain what you really mean. And then so that the students would understand that this was valuable, we would assess the quality of the feedback. Next slide. And definitely after doing all of those things, the quality of the feedback, there was a significant improvement. And I noticed this not only in the classroom activities, but again, in my own student evaluations, where I started to see a lot more comments in my evaluations. So my sort of lessons that I learned, that even if you're not specifically teaching in a cohort program or with English language learners, but you do decide to use peer assessment in your own class, just spending time talking about why it is important, why are you choosing to do it, having a discussion about what is good feedback, using some questions to guide students to on what to give feedback on. And then in your class, having multiple opportunities for peer assessment so that students can practice using that skill more often. So it's not just a one-off. And then giving feedback on their feedback, and perhaps even giving marks for the quality of their feedback. And that sums up my presentation. So I'll turn it back over to Phoebe.
Thank you very much, Anka. It's so interesting seeing all the different ways, but the overlap in the lessons that everyone's learned and the effect that it's had in your classrooms. So I'm going to stop screen sharing now for a minute. Actually, possibly for the rest. I have to check my slides. I would just like to introduce our discussant properly. So Armin Weinberger is the founding professor and head of the Department of Educational Technology and Knowledge Management at Saarland University. Armin is also our keynote speaker tomorrow at 11:15. So this is a plug for his keynote speech. He's going to be sharing in depth his work on the theoretical mechanisms underlying productive learning during group work. So it's very relevant to our topic of peer assessment, which is why Armin has joined us today. Armin is one of the most published and cited authors in computer-supported collaborative learning, with 20 years of experience in designing, implementing, and investigating the CSCL scripts, which is something I think he's going to be talking about tomorrow, and I'm not sure if he will delve into them today. But he's a perfect fit for this session, so we are very lucky to have him as our discussant. Armin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Phoebe. I'm typically doing discussions in the good, the bad, and the ugly kind of scheme, but not this time around. This is really only talking about highlights of the three presenters, which I'm going to talk about. I'm also going to try and look a little bit behind, let's say, the obvious effects of peer assessment, trying to discuss with you the hows and whys of why peer assessment is effective, and then deliberate a little bit about future directions to take. So, yeah, highlights. Schunn, what I was most impressed with was this idea of changing the role of the learner and allowing a peek into the backstage of how knowledge in a discipline is being treated in practices of a knowledge, yeah, creation and evaluation. So I think this is interesting, and that's something I try to do with my students all the time, to let them peek behind the curtains of how we are creating knowledge. And I always fall short, I feel. Sometimes I manage, and the best way that I can manage is indeed by peer assessment. Because, and the reason to do that is basically what I want learners is not just to put knowledge into their mind like I would put furniture into a room, but I would want them to appropriate the tools and practices of a field. So that was, I think, most interesting, that it's worthwhile to go down that path towards a constructive way of learning. With Jacqueline Stewart, well, first of all, she's having an environment that is dedicated to peer assessment. That's awesome by and of itself. I would like to point out one detail that I thought was really interesting, and it's a detail, of course, for this entire approach. Yet I think it is kind of interesting and important, namely that you can use different formats. So you might be surprised how well learners can deal with creating multimedia messages, can't they? And what's interesting here is, and what peer assessment then allows, is to transform and translate maybe a very concrete and let's say non-abstract video or any kind of student artifact into an abstract form. So you can reflect on something that is very concrete at the same time. And that, of course, leads to an idea of that you can use these learner artifacts, which I like to call emerging learning objects, ELOs, to use for further learning. And that is kind of a very different approach from pushing learning objects, the LOs, into the minds of learners. So here's a real chance there. Regarding Anka, Lekhi, so I thought that's really remarkable to go new path, to explore new path for learners that are in actually a challenging situation, if I understood that correctly, that they have to learn English and at the same time learn all these different disciplines. And you could tighten up and say, okay, now I have to push it really hard onto them, but you're going the other direction. That is remarkable in itself, to say, okay, now I'm applying this peer assessment approach for them to get involved, to actually learn these different disciplines in an active stance. So I thought that was very impressive. And of course, the fact that she was continually designing and redesigning to then also fill the need to scaffold peer assessment. Right, so that's my impression of the three presentations, which are highlights, I think. Now let's talk about how is peer assessment effective, and that's not like the whole picture, but those are four things that I would take note of. One thing is that if you introduce peer assessment, you're also managing and changing the expectations of students, which is interesting. So if you basically tell them that you will be assessed no matter what, and you will be assessed by a peer, that kind of changes their frame of thinking and also increases their effort. Because it's one thing to have the chance of being assessed by a teacher, which is somehow something that is accounted for. You're familiar with that, and you're not losing face if a teacher tells you to improve, or if a teacher gives you a bad grade. That's what you're expecting somehow, that you're getting a feedback from a teacher, or not, because teachers also not always have the time to provide feedback. But if you're sure that you're getting a feedback, you would be increasing your effort just by having this information. So I thought that is an interesting mechanism of peer assessment as well. Then, of course, and it has been pointed out, this notion of that you can compare different task solution, and actually that is the one way when you can realize why things are different from solution to solution. So you would only be able to start thinking about certain features of a solution when you have a comparison. So that is another mechanism. And of course, this notion of revisiting the problem once you do it yourself, and then you're looking at it again, a solution by a peer. So that kind of is a way to iterate, to repeat practice. And finally, of course, this notion of cognitive elaboration. You abstract, you elaborate, you re-represent a piece of knowledge with your own words and taking a different stance altogether. So these are interesting hows of peer assessment. I would also go even further and even deeper, I think, and talking about the why is peer assessment effective, and now we're really, you know, we're diving deep into the very basic human condition. There is a notion that we are meant to think together. We are meant to, or we are really geared to thinking in a yes but structure. Yeah, and there are results showing that we are really terribly bad at evaluating our own stance, our own opinion. So we would be pretty bad, or students would be pretty bad to evaluate their own product, but we are highly effective in criticizing others. And that is exactly the very basic human capability that is put to use here. So, and this of course is a form of thinking together to arrive at a better solution together. And this other notion is this notion of vertical versus horizontal interaction. I said it before a little bit in terms of expecting to being reviewed by a peer is different from being expected to be reviewed by a teacher, because you are basically geared to orient towards standards set by the teacher. Yeah, you're used to that. And regardless of what you're really thinking, you know the basic requirements. Yeah. So you would say, okay, the teacher is of course right. So whatever the teacher wants me to say, I'm gonna say regardless of what I truly believe. You're not even identifying any kind of misconceptions here. Whereas you're willing to engage in challenging your understanding, elaborate your thought with a peer. So that is this notion of vertical versus horizontal interaction, which can be put to use here. So horizontal interaction among peers through peer assessment is sometimes much more conducive to learning and especially to conceptual change than this vertical teacher to student interaction. Right, yeah, so future directions. Well, first of all, I think, and that's important to notice, I think peer assessment is ready to be implemented on a large scale in schools. That's not true for all or any approach within that is being under investigation in psychology and education. That is just not the case. But with regard to peer assessment, I think it is safe to say that it is ready to scale. The amount of research is just quite impressive, and it is quite robust, really. So I think this is ready to go big and really ready to try out. And future directions in terms of research, of course, well, one thing would be to take a learner's perspective and trying to think, how can we further facilitate how learners appropriate these standards of reviewing something? Yeah, you're basically changing the role. You basically have, as a student, having to apply criteria to analyze something, to evaluate something. How can we facilitate further to internalize these standards for future work as well? Yeah, to set criteria for, or to set academic standards, so to speak. And of course, the other question, and that has been also, of course, addressed before by Anka, this notion of to what extent do we need to scaffold peer assessment? And this is funny and really kind of like an open and difficult question, because on one hand, as I was saying, we are very, very capable of criticizing others. On the other hand, there are indications that additional scaffolding, additional training in how to criticize, maybe to criticize constructively, are kind of useful, helpful, beneficial. Yeah, that's it from my side. Thank you for your attention. It was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Armin. That was, as you can see in the chat, it got our brains all flowing and ideas are just pouring out. So our next step is to move to the breakout rooms. Although I actually just wanted to bring something up, because I should have said this earlier on when I introduced Chris, is that Chris is also responsible for creating Peerceptive, which is a peer assessment platform. We haven't spoken about it today. For those of you that were at the CAPME workshop this morning, I do see some of you. They share, Chris, you can explain it better than me, but they share some of the same founding principles. They're related.
I'd just add that some of the key functions of inside a group peer assessment you can now also do in Peerceptive, so both between groups and within groups. But I don't want to. We should get to breakout.
Yes, we won't go there. I just wanted to mention the platform and that you might be the one to talk to for anyone about that, along with Michael Dugdale, who uses it heavily. So we're moving to breakout rooms now. And the point of the breakout rooms is to give you about 10 minutes without any of us panelists or moderators or discussants present, amongst yourself in about groups of 4. We're going to assign you randomly to discuss what questions and ideas have arisen from what you've been listening to so far. And then please nominate however you want to do it. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. One person to, when you return back after the breakout rooms close, to type your #1 question for the panelist into the chat. So it may be hard to narrow it down to 1, but I'm sure you can do it. So I believe Jackie is putting us.
We are ready to go.
All right, so we'll set the timer for, say, I think we better keep it to 10 minutes looking at the time, and we'll see you all then.
Bye. We'll give you a 1-minute warning. Justin, is it working?
Jackie, I think group in room 1, there's only 1 person because 3 of us are not joining.
Well,
Oh,
I made it so that
okay.
that's just our room.
Got it.
Yeah.
Great.
Although
And
Liz
then
joined.
I did try to move Liz to a room 6. Is it not letting me move you, Liz? I did ask her and she wants to join your room. Do we know it? Did Justin Fletcher step away maybe? Yeah, he's in room 2. We did have a bit of attrition right before the breakout rooms opened. I was like, oh no, people are leaving.
It's the danger that, like, wait, we're going to have to talk.
I know, exactly.
They're going to know
So
I'm driving.
I moved people around a little bit, so.
Yeah, it does require, wait, someone's entering this room? I think we might need to move
I
one
think
other
it's
person.
a new participant.
Oh, and that's fine. I can move them too.
Oh.
After, hi, Maxime. Good to maybe orient to what we're doing.
He's just connecting to his audio. Oh, there we go. Hi, Maxime, can you hear us? Maybe, maybe not.
Oh.
Okay, and I did get Elizabeth moved, so that's good.
Oh, look, he vanished. Did you send him to a room or did he run away?
I sent him to a room,
Oh.
but I thought, but you don't have to click, like, he still would have had to accept, so. Oh,
Yes,
you're
right.
back. Maybe I won't send the invite right away.
Oh, there you are. Hi.
Hi. Sorry.
We're just
That's
doing an
okay.
activity. Hello.
So I just joined. I was at the poster and
I'll say it again because people are just joining back. Okay, recording is on now. Please, whoever was nominated or volunteered for your group, type your #1 question you'd like to see us address in the panel into the chat now. And I'll wait a couple minutes for them all to come in, and then I will try to ask the questions, starting with what is most asked. You may have to be a little patient with me because I notice my chat is slowing down over time here, but it will continue to work. Okay, so good. I see a question from Stefan's group and from Sasha's group. And Ahmed's group.
Such great questions. I'm excited.
Yeah, they're really interesting, and they're varied too. This is a wide range. Jackie, how many groups were there? 6?
7? No, 6. 6.
Okay. Okay, so that means 1, 2, 3. Okay, I will. You know what? I'll get a question out, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Wait for the last one to come in, unless it's already in and I just don't see it yet. So they're all quite different. So I'm just going to pick one here. Let's start quite broadly, perhaps actually with Ahmed's question, because it maybe is the first thing to address, as then we can move into the kind of the deeper, more theoretical stuff, although there's also some practical questions. But Ahmed asked about, you know, balancing content versus devoting time to activities that really do require time, like Anka explained how much scaffolding she had to implement and how much training it required. So how can those of us with content dense courses find the time?
Go ahead, Jacqueline. I saw your hand first.
My answer is not going to be comprehensive, but a few things that come to mind for that is if you want students to grow and develop their peer assessment or peer feedback skills, make that a course learning outcome. And so it becomes more explicit, then they know why you're spending time on it, even in a content dense course. And then the other thing I'll offer related to this is it's always nice to make it clear to students how much time you want them to spend on something. So with my particular example with the choice project, I told students that creating the thing should take about 3 to 4 hours, maybe 3 to 5, because I know I have some really engaged students who would spend 20 hours on this, and that's really not what it was supposed to take. So it doesn't really deal with that, you know, content heaviness directly, but helping make your expectations really clear, I think, can help students juggle everything.
This might sound outrageous, but I would say students forget stuff, the content in traditionally taught courses with like knowledge is measured in like the half-life is nanoseconds after the last exam. Like, why did we rush through so much content to have them forget almost everything? Aiming for less content that they actually remember in the next course is just reality. It's just the facts of the matter. The other is tests take a crazy amount of time too. The amount of time you spend, now this is the class period where we had the test, and this was the review session, and this is the debrief stuff. I've been doing less and less tests and more rich assignments with peer assessment. And if I delete test days, I actually have a lot of time for richer activities too. You know, when I was at McGill, some of my classes made the exams be at night and not take class time, but at my university, we're not allowed to be that cruel. So, you know.
Yeah, I would go ahead, Anka, please.
Sorry, I would also just add, just to echo that point, that Chris made about the having too much content. Is that really the goal? So there's that piece, but then also the piece of being creative, like what are you doing right now? And is there something that can just slightly be modified to embed the peer assessment piece? So sometimes you may think that it'll take a lot of time. So yes, okay, the training piece may take a bit of class time, but the actual peer assessment piece may be around something that you're already doing. There's just a slight twist on it.
If I can chime in a little bit as well, I think I second what has been said, and I think that in particularly with respect to peer assessment, this criticism or this problem of taking so much time to implement new ways of teaching does not really apply so very much. Actually, peer assessment would relieve you of quite a bit of work, as Chris was saying, right? So you can basically implement and guarantee assessment on a much larger scale without sacrificing class time. And a little trick, you can also, combine solutions on a second level, so to speak. So you can basically ask groups of students to arrive at then joint solutions, and from then move on to discuss them in class time, or to do another round of iteration of peer reviews, which would save you quite a bit of time then, rather than assessing 20 individual ones. You can assess 4 group solutions. So yeah, I see the issue, but not so much with respect to peer assessment.
Thank you, everyone. That's, I think, great advice. I think Amit has commented again, and I think for those of us who are CJEP teachers, which I imagine a bunch of us are here, it is worth noting that we are, some of us are extremely constrained by our curriculum. We're not allowed to cut out curriculum. They're taught. You might have 20 sections taught by 20 different teachers and a common final exam at the end with very specific content. So you have that added pressure and lack of freedom that I think Amit is referring to here. But you gave a lot of ideas for how to work it in and actually make it perhaps even ultimately save time with innovation.
There is one small point. I'm also hoping to convert enough people that collectively they could change the departmental final. So it's not that there's zero agency, it's just requires a bigger cabal to get together.
That is a very good point. So there's a lot of good questions. We'll see how many we get to. I think we're here until 3:30. A really interesting question was asked here, I believe, by Christine's group about how can we fit peer assessment in when one of our main goals, if we're looking at decolonizing and indigenizing our curriculum, where does peer assessment fit into this? I'll leave it open at that. It's a challenging question.
It's a challenging question, and I don't have a lot to offer on this specifically. However, I would love to hear what the group thinks, because surely there's people in this room with more direct experience in that. And my initial reaction is that this can absolutely help with those efforts, but I have not linked those two things together myself. So other panelists or the group.
Go for it, Chris.
I tried something this last semester kind of around this topic, and it's kind of linked to the assignment and the rubric. So I made social justice be a topic inside projects. It wasn't like everything, but it had like a corner that they could decide in their groups who would take that piece and explore the social justice issues around that larger science topic. And the peer assessment then asks people to attend to that. And it's basically if the assignment opens up and encourages you to think about problems from multiple angles, then people who've come from non-dominant cultures are invited in to bring their expertise as it relates to these things. And I got a lot of positive feedback, so it's not just my opinion, but I'm sure I can get it better, but I just wanted to point out the nature of the assignment and the rubrics play a big role.
Would any
I
members
see
of
a
that?
hand up, by the way.
Oh, sorry, it's Christine. That's exactly what I was going to ask. Please.
Yeah. So one of the ideas that comes behind this is because peer review is so much based on relationships, and a lot of our work on decolonizing and indigenizing has to do with relationships. So I'm sure that there's got to be some really rich ideas of how we can do this when we think about reciprocity and responsibility, relationships. I don't know how to articulate it, and I was wondering if any of you had experience with it that you could share with the group.
I guess just to come back to that, why I went the way I went is group dynamics are actually the largest place for microaggressions in undergraduate contexts. So as you open up group interactions and you don't put some guidance around it, the right kinds of problems that emphasize diverse ways of knowing and some guidance on how not to be an asshole, you can really do some damage. And we've got a lot of survey data the last year that's the most common place in our majors where there's issues.
I would also think that, one of the large issues, not the only one, but one issue of, aligning with efforts to decolonize pedagogies and to address disadvantaged groups is to, grant access to active forms of education and to not to give them a voice, but to letting their voice heard. Because the most tragic thing, I think, would be to leave disadvantaged groups with the impression that any academic practice is not for them. And peer assessment, in a way, kind of automatically involves people in academic practices that would otherwise not be available to them. When would they start to think about criteria of academic, standards? They wouldn't. If you wouldn't let them evaluate others. So I think that's an excellent example for addressing disadvantaged groups.
Liz?
Yeah, so I like where you're going with that comment, Armin. And what I would think, I don't know what response Christine might have, but I think, Christine, to sort of think about your point, this is where decolonization can be talked about with your students when you talk about criteria and you start talking about what are these standards. And I think it's, this is where it becomes really exciting to imagine a future in which we start recognizing, what is knowledge, different kinds of knowledge. And, and I think your point, I think Armin, you brought up the point about different forms, different types of artifacts that might be used and ways of rarefying the knowledge that we have as a group. So that could be a part of the way of thinking about how might you be sensitive to give underrepresented populations a voice, and how to respect those voices that are somewhat different and may not always sound the way we think it should sound. Because I think that that's part of what I believe, Christine, I don't know what your background is, but I'm thinking that you probably are more sensitive to these particular issues and teach in a discipline that where it's important to start having those conversations. But that's what I think we could start building. And this opens up a whole area of research that we haven't been doing, is, like, what is knowledge in different ways, and how does it become respected by an academic community?
Right.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to Christine's group too for what's an extremely useful question, and now perhaps makes us all want to go start reading some more about this. So we don't have a lot of time left. In fact, we only have 4 minutes, but there were some overlapping questions about just how to more examples of how to train our students to do PA, to provide useful feedback. How do you coach them? Anka, you did go into some of the details with this, but perhaps in the dwindling minutes, you guys can provide some more examples of how you might help students provide useful feedback for each other.
Sure. So I can just quickly start about we do spend, there is class time that we spend on, okay, what is useful feedback, and getting the students to come up with what kind of feedback is useful. So discussion of that it should be specific, not vague, use examples, talk about what worked well as what can be improved, and then focusing on so if it's a presentation, behavior that's actually changeable. So not focusing on the right parts of that presentation, and that it should align with the rubric or the objectives of the assignment. So within that, you can even go broader. So there are parts where, there are courses in our program where students will actually be given an example of feedback and then kind of unpacking, was this useful feedback or not? So this again is if you have the opportunity to have lots of time to spend on this. So this is an example of another class discussion where feedback is actually, examples of feedback are provided, and then, okay, let's unpack this. Was this useful? Why or why not? So that's what we've done.
I love all the points that Anka made, and those I call like the generic points. They're always every course, every kind of structure. I also find that every course and assignment type has some unique things that I need to learn about. And so if I have an arc of assignments that are kind of similar in building, I ask for feedback after the first one about the rubrics and the assignments. And then I tweak the assignment and the rubrics based on that feedback. So like, just don't think that you have to get everything right the first time. There's an empirical part to it, and getting some feedback from students about what in the rubric is not working for them, I think is like the path to success.
Thank you. I think we're about at the end of our time here. I wanted to just remind everyone that Armin's keynote session is tomorrow starting at 11:15, and it's really going to take a lot of what we discussed today to a whole nother level. So I hope we can see you all there. Thank you for coming today. Thank you very much to our panelists and our discussion. It was a fascinating discussion, and I feel like I have more to learn now than when I came into it. So much appreciated.